Deuteronomy 33 and 34. Congratulations on finishing Deuteronomy, on finishing the Pentateuch or Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. As we move now into Joshua, what I'd like to do is just summarize today where we've gone, the entire 5 books of the first 5 books of the Bible. Look at the picture once we're done and say, are we ready to move forward from here? Well, the story starts out, and a lot of this should be review, of course. The story starts out by saying, you are a marvelous, wonderful creature. You're more divine than you are human in the sense that you wonder up into the heavens. What's going on? Who are you? How did you get here? Where are you going? What are you meant to do in life? Our Creator God is loving, kind, patient, forgiving. And if you, in all your imperfection, are tamim, wholehearted in your desire to love Him, to be faithful to Him, He promises to return that kind of faithfulness to you. He will be faithful. He will be loving. He will keep you. The very words that are used of us come right back to us in the sense of a promise from this God. For reasons all His own, God, and this is like marriage, when we speak of salvation, we speak of the desire to be faithful to one God and not be faithful to any other. So as we've learned, for reasons all His own, God creates divine beings. And He puts them, in some sense, over humanity, so that we could say, like Micah 4, verse 5, all the peoples walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever. That's the basic tension of the Old Testament, that the peoples of other nations not only are under the authority of these gods, apparently by God's design, they also respond in worship of them. That worship probably is just as emotional, just as loving, just as enthusiastic as the Israelites, because they are tempted. They are told when they go into, this is Deuteronomy, when you go into Canaan, you will ask, how do I worship your God? So there must be something about this worship that was very delightful to look for or to watch others do. What is the behavioral difference between these two? Maybe not much. You walk your dog the same way. You plant your garden. You take care of your kids much the same way. However, 2 big things. We've learned this. This person has a different story in his mind. He sees the truth of the world in a different way. And secondly, he's part of a growing family. And that's really a large portion of the story of Genesis through Deuteronomy, is the formation of, through Abraham, one of the first people to do this, a family that is dedicated to Yahweh. This family is transformed over time into a nation, and they're given many laws, and those laws are quite extensive, and that again is a large part of what we've been reading. Well, again, like any marriage, this family is going to be tempted to be unfaithful. And the promise that's made in Deuteronomy 4 and 29, it's predicted there as well, or 28 and 29, is that they will break this promise. And instead of refusing to worship the gods of the other nations, they will actually worship them. They will choose to break fellowship with their God as a nation and follow the other gods of the other nations. Why? You've got to think it's because they must have seen something here that they wanted more than what their God was offering them. In the story, of course, they had been promised that if they were faithful, this family would get an inheritance. Well, that inheritance is right in front of them. Inheritance. That it would be a New Jersey-sized piece of land that they could live in and call their home, and they could watch their children and grandchildren grow up peaceably. That was the inheritance that they would have if they would stay faithful, which in that day, in that world, was the greatest possible inheritance a family could ever have. Well, of course, because of this, because of their breaking of, and this is all predicted in Deuteronomy, it hasn't happened yet, but it's predicted. The people are given both what they want, that is the gods of the other nations, but they're also given what they don't want, and that is to live among the people of the world. It's called the exile. Again, this is future, but it's predicted in Deuteronomy. And in that exile, remember that individuals within this world can still be right with God, but as a nation, they have now lost their inheritance. All right, so that's the story that we have to this point in Deuteronomy. The question, if I was living in Deuteronomy's day, would be, think of it, we have just been told, Deuteronomy 4, that someday our family, our nation, will go into exile. That would be a sad way of ending the story, knowing that we're not going to make our inheritance. So this, to me, this question would come to my mind. I would put it in the form of a question. Will God save his people from their sins? And there's the sin. Will he save them? If so, how? What would be the way in which God would save his people from this sin of idolatry? Well, knowing God, knowing how he's done it with Joseph and all the other stories we've heard, you know he's got a fascinating way of doing it. But we have to wait and see, of course, how that will happen. All right, so are we ready to go forward? Do you understand this story? Are you ready to work with it and not, here's the challenge, and not change it? Because the common challenge today is, at least in a lot of evangelical presentations, you're going to hear a different story, usually along the lines, and here's how you'll know it's a different story, if somehow it's described that you need to be perfect and that God demands perfection, and unless he gets perfection, you're in trouble, and the only way to solve that is to substitute someone else's perfection in place of your own. As soon as you get into that kind of language of substitution, well, then we're not talking this story at all. So I'd recommend that this story and the substitution story are really so different that they can't be played off each other. They can't work at the same time. We're going to have to choose which story to go forward with. And what I'm going to do, of course, in the Joshua to Jesus story to come now, Joshua and Jesus, by the way, in Hebrew, that's the same name. So there is a Savior in the immediate proximity, and there will be a Savior to come. That will be the story that we're going to follow. It will be this story that will fall into place as we go.